Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alyson Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. South Africa goes to the polls on the 29th of May. I will track the election and bring you ground reports. Is it the end of the road for the African National Congress? And will former President Jacob Zuma stage a dramatic comeback? From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alyson Grange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Israel criticizes the US for its warning to pause shipment of weapons delivery if Rafah is invaded. Israel calls it disappointing and frustrating. In Turkey, a passenger jet carrying 184 people on board landed on its nose gear after bursting a tire in Antalya. This is the second incident in 2 days after a cargo plane landed on its nose in Istanbul on Wednesday. Now, Kenya's government signs a deal with doctors after nearly 2 months of strike that left thousands of patients struggling to find medical care. The South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol apologizes for the handbag scandal involving his wife and concedes that his party's crushing election defeat last month reflected the government's failure. And in Thailand, at least one person has been reported dead and over 200 evacuated after a massive blaze erupted on an industrial park housing a gas storage. Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story. Kenya is reeling under a devastating deluge. Floods triggered by heavy rain have ravaged the country and have claimed over 250 lives so far, while nearly 55,000 households have been displaced. Now, Kenya's President William Ruto has declared a public holiday on Friday to mourn the deaths of flood victims. This as torrential rain that started in April has turned the streets of Kenya into rivers and submerged houses in several parts of the East African nation. Rescue workers were forced to airlift the stranded citizens in some places.
The water came and I felt as if something was falling. That's when the water swept us with my wife and child. I got stuck and was drenched in mud. I got up and started looking for my child. The baby had cried for a while, but I could not find them. There was nothing I could have done.
Kenya also delayed the reopening of schools by 2 weeks until this coming Monday, as government data states that floods have damaged at least 1,000 schools across the country. The country's misery doesn't end here. Weeks of destructive rain and floods have led to a surge in cholera cases across the country. The eastern part of the flood-hit nation has reported 44 cases of cholera, which is an intestinal infection that spreads through contaminated food and water. However, Kenya is not the only East African country battered by floods. In Tanzania, heavier than usual rain triggered floods and landslides that killed at least 155 people. Strong winds caused due to the cyclone Hidea also battered Tanzania and led to a blackout in most parts. The floods have forced at least 400 people to live in Tanzania's rescue centers.
We all agreed not to go, but there are some who are stubborn. So at times when we get there we get problems. Some die, and things like that. So many have not gone out today.
In Tanzania's neighboring nation Burundi, people in the capital city of Bujumbura were forced to use canoes as roads were submerged underwater. Now the floods in Burundi have killed at least 29 people.
The flooding forced me to move out. The water has been rising here. We are a family of 10, and there are children as well who are in school. I am also a student. We often get late for class. When we moved here, we never imagined the waters could ever reach this level. But it kept rising, so we decided to move out.
Floods have ravaged several parts of East Africa. The affected countries also include Rwanda, Somalia, and Ethiopia. Now, according to a UN report, the deluge has affected over 630,000 people across the region, and over 230,000 were displaced in the last 5 days. The rainfall in East Africa has been amplified by the El Niño weather pattern. It is a naturally occurring climate phenomenon that is typically associated with increased heat worldwide. It leads to drought in some parts of the world and heavy downpours elsewhere. Now, for more on this, we have with us Mark Bichachi, a senior journalist from Nairobi. Thank you very much for being with us. Now, the floods in Kenya have been devastating, claiming the lives of at least 250 people so far from this disaster. Take us through the situation in Kenya right now.
Well, the situation in Kenya is one where the infrastructure to begin with has largely been destroyed, both within the capital city of Nairobi and other towns, cutting off entire communities from supplies of food that they depend on. At the same time, we've seen over 200 people who've lost their lives, with dozens missing as well, together with 223,000 people affected by these floods. The waters are presently receding, given that the rainfall has significantly reduced. However, because of the amount of landslides and the amount of debris that has affected many places, rescue efforts are still ongoing, although the hopes of finding individuals alive within those particular areas is dwindling by the day. At the same time, this has affected largely our schooling situation, where many schools have remained closed, especially boarding schools. Then we've got the issue of cholera that you've mentioned there in your report, and this is due to the fact that many of the citizens of this country use what are called pit latrines, which are simply holes dug into the ground. And when it floods, then you can imagine that the water carries out the refuse that is in those particular pits, and then that causes disease. Also, these floods have cut out some water supply in some areas. So it is a situation that is going to take Kenya a while to recover from. There's a lot to be done in terms of bringing aid to people, with thousands living in aid camps, and also other thousands requiring emergency aid. At the same time, the government has put aside about $4 million to be able to support flood victims. Those are about 10,000 families that are expected to be targeted. At the same time, the government is receiving pledges of aid from the United States, from the UAE through Dubai, and many other countries which are standing strong with the Republic of Kenya.
Right. Now, Kenya isn't the only East African nation to be affected. other eastern parts of the continent also struggling with this unusually high rainfall. And this is being attributed to the El Nino and also to climate change. What are your thoughts?
Well, first and foremost, this is probably the third time I have seen El Nino effects in this country. And I can tell you from personal experience and also from records that this is the most devastating El Nino has ever been in this country, with many more deaths, many more landslides. So this is not just about El Nino. And remember, there was also some flooding last year in October 2023. So this is definitely exacerbated by global warming. It is exasperated by the fact that this country, for example, has not had reports of a cyclone doing landfall in this country in much of our history. Therefore, the situation in Kenya is definitely exasperated by climate change, and it is unfairly affected by this. And unfortunately, the areas also that are affected are also unduly affecting those who are poorer in this country. We have seen very few reports of the wealthy being affected as much as those who live in makeshift buildings across the city of Nairobi being affected and being needed to be rescued.
Right. Now, Mark, Africa is responsible for less than 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, while the richest 10% of the world's population are responsible for over half of the carbon emissions. Yet Africa is the most vulnerable to climate change and is being hit the hardest by its effects. Do you think that the responsibility should lie mostly with the world's richest and that they must act for Africa?
Well, that is definitely for sure. In fact, the question is also, just to extend your question, is also the question of the West and Asian tigers burnt fossil fuels in order to develop, and yet they're hamstringing Africa from doing the same. So it is one, they succeeded by damaging Africa by all intents and purposes, and now hamstringing Africa to meet goals of global climate change goals, while at the same time not allowing Africa to develop, while allowing Africa to suffer. Now, there are programs, for example, the carbon credit program, that they are trying to push so that Africa is recompensed by keeping up its forests and keeping up planting trees. But this by no means is not going to be enough, because by estimate, Kenya has today looked at a loss of over almost $1 billion worth of damage across the country. Now, this $1 billion is not going to be covered by carbon credits. It's not going to be covered by the donations that we are receiving from the West. And the West and the East, for that matter, are not going to come and develop our countries for free. So definitely, Africa needs to get back to the negotiation table and say, listen, we are most affected. We have not developed. We, for example, Kenya gets more than 80% of its electricity through renewable resources from wind, solar, and geothermal sources. It is not a large-scale contributor to global warming. Yet today, it is suffering significantly because of such effects. So Africa needs to get back to the table. It needs to demand that it is compensated for the damage that it is incurring because of the actions of the West up to 200 years back. But at the same time, we must be pragmatic and remember, Africa has been talking about reparations for decades now. It has never happened. Why? Because Africa still goes to the West with its begging bowl and asking to be helped, instead of standing on its own 2 feet and demanding that it is treated fairly and equitably according to what it has gone through historically and currently.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on Firstpost Africa and for all your valued insights.
You're most welcome.
Now, from East Africa, let's move to the West. Russian President Vladimir Putin is adding to his list of nuclear partners in West Africa. Now, the latest country ready to join hands with Russia in the nuclear market is Sierra Leone. Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov hosted his counterpart from Sierra Leone, Timothy Musa Kabba, in Moscow. The two leaders sat down for talks that focused primarily on collaboration in nuclear energy. Moscow and Freetown also discussed the prospects of constructing a nuclear power plant in Sierra Leone. Historically, Russia has had good relations with Sierra Leone. Moscow characterized Sierra Leone as a long-standing and dependable partner in Africa. The Russian Foreign Minister also said Moscow plans to open new diplomatic missions on the African continent. Russia says it will soon reopen its embassy in Sierra Leone after 32 years. With increasing volatility in oil prices in recent years and the need to transition towards cleaner sources of energy, many African governments have shown interest in investing in nuclear power. Now, tapping on this, Russia has been making strides to export its technology and to build nuclear plants in the global south. So even though Moscow is dealing with Western sanctions for its war in Ukraine, its state-owned nuclear giant Rosatom is drumming up new business in Africa. Now today there is just one nuclear power station on the African continent in Cape Town, South Africa. Now Russia's Rosatom has already signed cooperation agreements with the countries of Burkina Faso, Mali and Algeria. Kenya, Uganda and Rwanda have also announced plans to construct nuclear power plants. But the question is, why is Russia pushing into Africa's nuclear energy market? It's because for Moscow, these commercial partnerships in Africa serve both economic and geopolitical purposes. This will allow Moscow to forge new economic alliances, offering long-term revenue for its economy, which remains isolated from the West for the foreseeable future. Now, the Russian economy has been burdened with Western sanctions over its invasion of Ukraine and is now deeply dependent for growth on wartime military production. And what's in it for Africa? Hundreds of millions of people across the continent lack electricity. So countries in Africa want to provide affordable electricity to its people without pumping more carbon into the atmosphere. For them, it's an opportunity for positive change. Let's shift our focus to Mali now. The West African nation has ended its 11-year mission with the European Union. Now, the European Union has announced withdrawal of the military training mission from Mali amid the deteriorating ties between the bloc and the country's military junta. For over a decade, the EU mission trained the Malian armed forces and members of the G5 Sahel, a multinational counter-terrorism force. But tensions between the European Union and Mali reached its breaking point in recent years. The European Union suspended the mission in 2022 after the junta said it was pulling out of the G5 Sahel. The bloc says its decision comes after taking into account the evolution of the political and security situation on the ground. Mali has been under military rule since August of 2020, the first of 8 coups in West and Central Africa over 4 years. Now, the military promised to hand over power through ballot box in February, but they have postponed the elections to an unspecified date, citing a fragile security situation aggravated by the jihadist attacks. The rift between the West and the junta governments in West Africa has only been widening. The junta-led states have distanced themselves from former colonial ruler France, kicking out its troops, and the West blames the tensions on Russia. The junta-led states are turning toward Russia as an economic and security partner. Earlier this year, European Union's top diplomat, Joseph Borrell, has said that the bloc faced a dilemma over its presence in West Africa, since it did not want to cooperate with Russia's expanding military forces in the region. In January this year, the junta-led Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger also decided to withdraw from the West African bloc ECOWAS. Now, this further complicated EU presence in the region. Russia already has a strong presence in Mali and could be soon in Niger and Burkina Faso too. Africa Corps say Russian mercenary force succeeded the Wagner Group, which was deployed to Mali in 2021. Earlier this year, a contingent of the Africa Corps was also flown into Burkina Faso. Worsening situation with Niger and the United States also reflects on the growing tensions. Now, the Niger junta also revoked military partnership with the EU last year. So, West African countries are clearly distancing themselves from the West at an accelerating pace, highlighting the region's frustration with the West's methods. And finally, to our special segment, Resurgent Africa. Amid the coups and the crises, there are many positive stories from Africa that often get overlooked, but not on this show. Now, we started our show today on a somber note about Kenya battling floods, but that's not all that is happening in that country. In Kenya's capital, Nairobi, students are setting an example for the world. Determined to fight for their right to breathe clean air, they have launched a bamboo project to improve the air quality around their school, which is located right next to Kenya's largest dump site. Our next report gets you the details.
This is the Dandora dump, Kenya's largest dump site, located east of the capital Nairobi. 23 years ago, this dump was declared full. Yet hundreds of trucks arrive daily to heap more waste. This nearly 50 acres of land receives more than 2,000 tons of waste every day. Armed with gardening hose and bamboo seedling, Kenya's younger generation has decided to take matter into their own hands. These students study in a school near the Dandora dump. Every morning smoke billows from the burning of refuse, floating its way over to their school. Over time, cases of respiratory illnesses among students and teachers started increasing.
The dump site produces gas in the morning and also in the afternoon. Seeing is becoming a problem in the morning. They produce mist, they produce fogs which really pollutes the environment, produces bad smells, which it seems as if somebody is living in a toilet whereby you are in a classroom, funny enough. But some of the challenges that really affect us is the smell coming out from the dump site, the smoke. Burning of those elements in there really produces spokes that also triggers asthma. Asthma is a disease that it's commonly known in Dandora Secondary School.
The impacts of air pollution to all parts of our bodies, including our brains, our organs, including our lungs, actually impact on even children before they are born, young children. It is really the best way to ensure that you do not breathe polluted air is to minimize your exposure.
So, the students launched a bamboo project to fight back. More than 100 bamboo plantings dot the mini forest created around the school. They hope fully grown bamboo would help filter the filthy air around the school.
My motivation of initiating bamboo project in the school was to mitigate the effects of dump site. It really pollute the air that we breathe, and with that I know it is going to reduce the cases of respiratory infections amongst the people in the Dandora community.
UNESCO hails bamboo trees as one of nature's finest air purifier. This is because it has a high uptake of carbon dioxide.
Now, planting bamboo trees ensures that there is a barrier that is provided in terms of the air that is polluted coming through, especially when you look at the fine particles. As well as, of course, the bamboo being a plant ensures that there is photosynthesis, and in photosynthesis ensures that it's producing oxygen, whereas also intaking carbon dioxide.
The publicly funded school has its fair share of challenges. The project relies on donations to afford the seedlings. That cost around 400 Kenya shillings or around $3 each. But the school management is determined to keep going until the entire 900-meter wall that separates it and the dump site is covered by bamboo trees. The Dandora Secondary School is also planting other species of trees for better air circulation.
As Dandora fraternity, we have come to a conclusion in order to pick other species to come forward in order to plant them. These species include jacaranda and the grevillea. The reason behind why we are picking the species is that they are easy to plant, easy to access the seedling. And the other advantage is that the tree will be helpful in order to boost our air circulation around our school, since we are near to a dump site.
There are other challenges too. Vultures from the dump site are a nuisance at mealtimes. Students even have to guard their plates from being snatched. The United Nations Environment Programme deployed sensors to Nairobi's Dandora neighborhood from October 2023 to April 2024 to monitor pollution levels from the dump site. Out of the 166 days monitored, only a mere 12 days met the WHO guidelines of air quality. Air pollution kills about 7 million people in the world. The WHO says 99% of the global population were exposed to contaminated air in 2019. But children at Kenya's Dandora Secondary School are determined to have the right to breathe clean air.
And that's it on the show. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching and goodbye. Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alyson Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. South Africa goes to the polls on the 29th of May. I will track the election and bring you ground reports. Is it the end of the road for the African National Congress? And will former President Jacob Zuma stage a dramatic comeback? From elections to climate change, to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost.